Grace Leland and Jeremy Collins were the last two people anyone suspected. One, a quiet schoolteacher engaged to a local hero. The other, a disgraced businessman with a ruined reputation. But together, they plotted one of the most cold-blooded murders Elmridge had ever seen. The morning of November 3rd, 2021, began like any other in Elmridge, Colorado. The mountain air was crisp and the town's streets were slowly coming to life. At 8:17 a.m., Maria Delgado, Todd Morgan's longtime housekeeper, pulled into the driveway of his secluded estate on the outskirts of town. She had worked for Todd for over 5 years and had never missed a Tuesday cleaning. But nothing could have prepared her for what she would find inside that morning. As she entered the front door, Maria immediately sensed something was wrong. The alarm system wasn't armed, which was unusual. Todd was known to be meticulous about home security. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air itself knew something was off. She called out for him, but there was no answer. Maria walked slowly through the house, her footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors. Then she saw it. Todd, slumped back in his leather recliner in the den, motionless. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and there was a dark red stain spreading across his chest. Shaken, Maria dialed 911. The call came into the Elmridge Police Department at 8:23 a.m. Officers arrived within 10 minutes. At first glance, some responders thought it could have been a medical emergency. Todd had no known health issues, but anything was possible. However, as one of the officers stepped closer, he noticed the unmistakable outline of a bullet wound through Todd's crisp white shirt. Blood had pooled beneath the recliner, half soaked into the expensive area rug. This was no accident. Todd Morgan had been murdered. News spread fast in Elmridge. Todd wasn't just another wealthy man living in a secluded home. He was one of the town's most visible residents, a successful real estate developer who sponsored local sports teams, donated to the animal shelter, and hosted charity events. People liked him. They trusted him. The idea that someone would murder him in cold blood felt impossible. But the evidence was clear. The killer had been close enough to shoot Todd directly in the chest, and there were no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked when Maria arrived. The windows were intact. And oddly, nothing had been stolen. Detectives combed through the house for clues. The home security system had been shut off manually just before midnight, and the hard drive, storing surveillance footage, had been removed. The missing drive suggested one thing. The killer knew exactly what they were doing and likely had access to the house, or to Todd. Crime scene technicians dusted for fingerprints and took samples from the blood spatter. They catalogued the missing items and searched for the murder weapon, but it was nowhere to be found. What should have been a peaceful morning in a quiet mountain town had become the scene of a calculated killing, and as detectives stood in the den, staring at Todd Morgan's lifeless body, one thing was already clear. This wasn't a random crime. It was personal. In the days following Todd Morgan's murder, the Elmridge Police Department launched a full-scale investigation. With no sign of forced entry and the security system deactivated from inside the house, detectives quickly concluded that Todd either knew his killer or the killer had intimate knowledge of the property. This wasn't a random break-in gone wrong. It was deliberate. The first person police looked into was Jeremy Collins, Todd's former business partner. A year earlier, Jeremy and Todd had co-founded Ridgeview Properties, a real estate development firm that had become one of the fastest growing businesses in the region. But their partnership had ended bitterly. Todd had accused Jeremy of mismanaging funds and, more seriously, of embezzlement. Though no formal charges were filed, Todd forced Jeremy out of the company and publicly severed ties. The fallout was ugly, and Jeremy's professional reputation never recovered. Rumors circulated around town that he blamed Todd for ruining his life. Despite the obvious motive, Jeremy had a solid alibi. On the night Todd was killed, he was in Albuquerque attending a real estate conference. Phone GPS data placed him at a hotel, and several attendees confirmed seeing him there throughout the night. Surveillance footage from the hotel lobby showed him checking in and leaving the next morning. It was airtight. Unless someone helped him, or he had manipulated the trip to create an alibi, Jeremy was unlikely to be the shooter. With Jeremy ruled out, at least for the moment, detectives turned their attention to Todd's fiancée, Grace Leland. Grace had moved to Elmridge 2 years earlier to teach at the local middle school. She was quiet, polite, and largely kept to herself. Few people knew much about her background. She and Todd had started dating not long after she arrived in town, and within a year, they were engaged. Grace had posted glowing photos of them together online, vacations, dinner parties, holiday gatherings. But as detectives interviewed her, something felt off. Grace told police she had been in Denver visiting a friend the night of the murder. The friend, a woman named Rachel Simmons, initially backed up her story, but when questioned a second time, Rachel hesitated. She admitted that Grace had only arrived at her apartment the morning after the murder, not the night before as she claimed. That put Grace's whereabouts during the crucial hours into question. Even more troubling was Todd's phone record. At 1:06 a.m., roughly the estimated time of death, Todd made a brief call to Grace. It lasted only 6 seconds. There was no voicemail, and Grace claimed she didn't pick up, but the timing was suspicious. Investigators began to wonder if Grace had been at the house that night. The discovery pushed Grace higher on the list of suspects. Her cool demeanor during interviews raised additional red flags. When asked about Todd's finances or their life, insurance policies, she became evasive. As the days passed, the case only grew more tangled. The answers weren't coming easily, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear to investigators. Someone close to Todd had wanted him dead, and Grace was no longer just a grieving fiancée. As investigators dug deeper into Todd Morgan's life, they began to unravel a narrative very different from the public image he had carefully crafted. Known in Elmridge as a generous, successful entrepreneur, Todd had built a reputation on charm, confidence, and the illusion of wealth. But beneath the surface, his finances were in serious disarray. Bank records revealed a mountain of debt. Todd had maxed out multiple credit cards, taken out personal loans, and had recently fallen behind on payments for several properties. The once thriving Ridgeview Properties was no longer profitable, and without Jeremy Collins managing operations, the business had begun to collapse. Yet Todd continued to present himself as a man in control, throwing lavish parties and making large public donations, all while silently drowning in bills. One of the most significant discoveries came when detectives reviewed Todd's recent insurance history. Just 6 weeks before his murder, a life insurance policy had been taken out in his name, valued at $1 million. The beneficiary? Grace Leland. The timing was suspicious. Grace and Todd had only been engaged for 4 months at that point, and the policy had been pushed through quickly, using an expedited process typically reserved for urgent or high-risk cases. Investigators found no medical justification for the urgency. Todd's financial advisor confirmed that Todd had seemed desperate in their last few meetings. He had talked vaguely about securing Grace's future, but it was clear he was more focused on liquid assets than long-term planning. The advisor also mentioned that Todd had seemed increasingly paranoid, mentioning late-night noises outside his house and people asking questions about old deals. The autopsy report added another layer to the mystery, The bullet that killed Todd was fired from a rare .38 caliber antique revolver. It was a collector's item, not a weapon typically used in modern crimes. When police reviewed Todd's social media and online activity, they found photos and posts from months earlier showcasing his growing gun collection. One image featured the very model used in his murder. According to his inventory, the gun had been stored in a locked display case in his den. Now it was missing. The theory was clear. Todd was likely killed with his own weapon, one the killer knew existed and knew how to access. With this information, investigators began to paint a chilling picture. The killer hadn't just struck out of rage or panic. The murder had been planned. The security system was disarmed. The weapon was selected with purpose, and the killer had vanished without leaving behind significant physical evidence. Whoever committed the crime had thought through each step and likely assumed the insurance payout would be the perfect ending. The discovery of Grace's potential financial gain shifted the investigation sharply. If she knew about the policy, knew about Todd's financial instability, and had access to his house and belongings, she had both motive and opportunity. But there were still unanswered questions. Had she acted alone? Or was someone else helping her execute a crime this deliberate? As suspicion continued to grow, detectives followed the evidence with renewed focus, determined to uncover the full truth. As the investigation advanced, police circled back to Grace Leland with mounting suspicion. Her shaky alibi and the revelation of her potential financial gain from Todd's death had placed her at the center of the case. But it was what came next that would begin to unravel the entire conspiracy. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Grace's personal devices and online accounts. What they found was both chilling and revealing. Her search history in the weeks leading up to Todd's murder included phrases like how to disable a home security system, how to shoot a revolver, and how long does gunpowder residue stay on clothes. Other searches were even darker: painless poisons, life insurance payout after homicide, and how to make murder look like a robbery. Her internet activity alone was incriminating, but police needed physical evidence to connect her to the crime scene. That evidence came in the form of cell phone data. Grace's phone, which she had claimed remained in Denver with her, pinged off a cell tower less than 2 miles from Todd's home around 12:50 a.m., just minutes before the estimated time of death. The signal then disappeared for nearly an hour, reappearing in downtown Denver at approximately 3 a.m. The implication was clear. Grace had lied about where she had been that night. Then came the most significant breakthrough. A neighbor who lived more than 200 feet away from Todd's house had a motion-sensitive outdoor camera pointed toward the street. On the night of the murder, the camera had been triggered at exactly 12:46 a.m. The footage showed a dark figure walking along the tree line, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and carrying a small bag. The image was grainy, but after enhancement, investigators believed the figure matched Grace's build and walking posture. The video alone wasn't enough to convict her, but when combined with her online searches, cell data and motive, the case was becoming stronger by the day. Faced with the overwhelming weight of the evidence, Grace was brought in for a second, formal interview. Though she maintained her innocence, her composure began to fracture. Her story about being in Denver grew increasingly vague, and she struggled to account for the unexplained gaps in her timeline. Then came the unexpected twist that shifted the investigation completely. While reviewing Grace's call logs, detectives noticed a late-night phone call placed just 10 minutes after Todd was murdered. The call lasted under a minute and was placed to an out-of-state number. When traced, it led back to Jeremy Collins, Todd's former business partner and the man investigators had initially ruled out. It was a stunning discovery. Jeremy had seemed to be out of the picture, with a verified alibi at a real estate conference in New Mexico. But the timing of the call raised new questions. Why would Grace contact Jeremy just after Todd's death? Investigators began to re-examine Jeremy's alibi with a more critical eye, suspecting that his trip may not have been what it seemed. The investigation, once focused solely on Grace, was now opening into something far more elaborate. It was no longer just about a betrayal. It was beginning to look like a conspiracy. The revelation of Grace Leland's call to Jeremy Collins just minutes after Todd Morgan's murder turned the case on its head. Investigators, who had originally dismissed Jeremy as a suspect due to his airtight alibi, now saw him in a different light. The late-night call, coupled with Grace's mounting evidence, suggested a coordinated effort. This wasn't a solo crime. It was a planned and deliberate conspiracy. Detectives began re-examining Jeremy's trip to Albuquerque, and the cracks started to show. While surveillance footage placed him at the hotel during the check-in and check-out times, there were no confirmed sightings of him between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., the night Todd was killed. The conference he claimed to attend didn't officially begin until the following morning. When police requested swipe card data from the hotel, they discovered Jeremy's room hadn't been accessed at all during the night in question. In other words, he could have checked in, left unnoticed, driven to Elmridge, and returned before morning. Phone records supported the possibility. Though Jeremy's mobile device stayed in Albuquerque, a burner phone, registered to a fake name, was traced to a cell tower outside Elmridge just after midnight, minutes before Todd was murdered. This same burner phone had only one outgoing call logged, the 58-second call to Grace. That call connected them undeniably. Faced with this new evidence, detectives obtained warrants to search Jeremy's home. Inside a locked drawer in his garage, they found the missing revolver. The serial number had been partially filed off, but it was still legible enough to trace. Ballistic tests confirmed it was the murder weapon. Gunshot residue was also found on a pair of gloves in the same drawer. When confronted, Jeremy initially denied everything. He claimed he had no idea how the gun ended up in his possession and suggested it was planted. But the weight of the evidence was impossible to ignore. Once forensics confirmed his fingerprints on the revolver, prosecutors moved quickly to arrest him. Meanwhile, Grace was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. Under pressure, she eventually agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a full confession. Her account revealed the horrifying depth of the plot. Grace and Jeremy had reconnected after he was ousted from Ridgeview Properties. They bonded over there, shared resentment toward Todd. Jeremy for destroying his career, and Grace for discovering that Todd was deep in debt and had no intention of telling her. What began as venting turned into flirtation, then a secret affair. Over time, their conversations shifted from bitterness to planning. Jeremy was the architect. He knew Todd's routines, where he kept his weapons, and how to disarm the security system. Grace, with direct access to Todd's home, would be the one to pull the trigger. The plan was simple: kill Todd, make it look clean, and collect the $1 million insurance payout. Then they'd disappear and start over. The plan might have worked, but one overlooked camera, one miscalculated phone call, and a rush of digital evidence exposed them both. In the end, Grace was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jeremy went to trial, maintained his innocence, but was found guilty on all counts. He too will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The murder of Todd Morgan wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated betrayal, executed by the two people he trusted most.